welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. I hate Tuesdays. Always have. Not quite Monday's honest misery. Just Tuesday's bland pretense that the week is somehow progressing. The alarm blared at 6:30 a.m. Same as always, and I swatted at it with practiced annoyance. My apartment in Tampa wasn't much, but it was mine, 14th floor, facing east toward what realtors optimistically called a partial water view. This morning, the horizon was hazy, the sun a watery smear behind thin clouds. Nothing unusual for Florida in August. The neighbors upstairs were already at it, their bass-heavy music vibrating through my ceiling as I shuffled to the bathroom. Some people had no concept of common courtesy. It's not even 7. Assholes. I muttered, turning on the shower. The pipes groaned. Another thing maintenance had promised to fix last month, before lukewarm water sputtered out. I made a mental note to email the building manager. Again. Shower. Coffee. Toast. News. The morning routine unfolded with mechanical precision, each step as mindless as the last. My phone buzzed with a calendar notification. Quarterly review meeting, 9 a.m. Shiz. I'd forgotten to prepare my presentation slides. I gulped the last of my coffee, grabbed my laptop bag, and headed for the door. That's when I noticed how quiet it had gotten upstairs. The sudden silence was almost as annoying as the music had been. The elevator was empty, which was unusual for this time. Normally, I'd share the descent with at least 2 other bleary-eyed professionals, all of us avoiding eye contact. Today, it was just me and the 2 bright fluorescent lights. The lobby was similarly deserted, save for Marcus, the security guard who was always there on weekday mornings. Morning, Marcus, I said, not breaking stride. He looked up from his phone, his expression oddly stiff. Morning, be careful out there today. I paused, hand on the door. Traffic bad, something like that, he said, already looking back at his phone. Outside, the air felt heavy, thick with humidity that promised another scorching day. My car, practical 5-year-old sedan, sat where I'd left it. The parking lot was surprisingly empty for a Tuesday. I checked my watch, 7:15 a.m. Maybe everyone was running late today. The radio came on automatically when I started the car. Mid-sentence through some news report, officials are advising residents to remain calm as authorities investigate the unusual tidal activity reported along the Gulf Coast overnight. I switched to my Spotify playlist. Too early for whatever crisis du jour the news was hyping. Probably a red tide warning or storm system brewing. Nothing that wouldn't still be there after my meeting. Traffic was lighter than usual on the causeway, which should have been a blessing. Instead, it felt eerie, as if I'd accidentally woken up on a holiday. The sky to the west looked strange, darker than it should be, with clouds that seemed to hang too low. Typical Florida weather, unpredictable and dramatic, nothing worth dwelling on. My phone rang through the car speakers, cutting off my music. It was Lisa from work. Hey, where are you? She asked, her voice tight. On my way in, about 15 minutes out. Why, you haven't seen the news? The alerts, I frowned. What alerts? As if on cue. My phone buzzed with a notification, and the radio cut back in with that distinctive emergency broadcast tone that always made my skin crawl. Emergency alert. Unusual tidal activity reported along Florida's Gulf Coast. Residents in coastal areas advised to monitor local news. This is not an evacuation order. That, Lisa said flatly. They've been coming through since about 5 a.m. Probably just some high tide situation, I said, squinting at the darkening horizon. Or another hurricane scare. You know how they overhype these things. Maybe, she said, not sounding convinced. Just get here. Okay. Mendez canceled the quarterly review. He's called an all-hands instead. That was unusual. Mendez never canceled meetings, especially not ones where he got to critique everyone's performance. What's going on? Lisa, I asked, a flicker of unease finally breaking through my morning haze. I don't know, she admitted, but half the office hasn't shown up, and those Coastline alerts keep getting more frequent. Just hurry. She hung up before I could respond. I turned the radio back on, scanning for actual information rather than vague warnings. Reports coming in from Clearwater Beach, Street, Petersburg, and Fort Myers of what witnesses describe as rapid coastal changes. Authorities urged the public not to approach shorelines and to follow official guidelines as they. Another emergency alert cut through. The same message as before. I switched the station. Coastal patrol boats have lost contact, and satellite imagery shows what appears to be significant geographic alterations along. I turned it off. Geographic alterations? What did that even mean? Erosion happened all the time in Florida. Nothing newsworthy about it. This had to be overblown media panic. The office building came into view, its glass facade reflecting the increasingly ominous sky. The parking garage was half empty. I found a spot close to the entrance, which never happened on weekdays. The lobby was buzzing with nervous energy when I arrived. Clusters of coworkers stood around the large televisions normally used for corporate announcements, which now displayed news coverage. I caught fragments of conversations as I made my way to the elevators. Said the beach just wasn't there anymore. My sister in Naples can't get through to anyone. Government isn't telling us everything. Lisa intercepted me before I could reach my desk. Her normally impeccable appearance was slightly disheveled, her eyes wide. They're saying the coastline is changing, she said without preamble. Not eroding, changing. Disappearing in some places. I set my laptop bag down. That's ridiculous. Coastlines don't just vanish. Tell that to Clearwater Beach, she said, thrusting her phone at me. The screen showed a social media post, shaky footage of what should have been a beach. Instead, there was just absence. Not water, not land, something else. Something that made my eyes hurt to focus on. It's fake, I said immediately, handing the phone back. Someone's digital manipulation going viral. You know how people are with disaster porn. Lisa didn't look convinced, but before she could argue, the office speakers crackled to life. All employees, please report to the conference center immediately for an emergency briefing, Mendez's voice announced, lacking its usual authoritative confidence. As we filed into the large conference room, I noticed people checking their phones compulsively, refreshing news sites, texting family members. The fear was contagious, feeding on itself. Mendez stood at the front, flanked by two grim-faced men in suits I didn't recognize. Government types, from their bearing. As some of you are aware, Mendez began, there is an unusual situation developing along Florida's coastline. These gentlemen are from the Emergency Management Office and will be advising us on protocols for the next 48 hours. One of the men stepped forward. At this time, we're asking all businesses to implement their emergency work-from-home protocols. The governor will be making an announcement at noon. Until then, please return to your homes calmly and avoid coastal areas. Questions erupted from the crowd. The man held up his hands. "This is precautionary only," he insisted, though his eyes said otherwise. "We're investigating reports of unusual oceanic phenomena. There is no immediate danger to Tampa." Yet, I thought, no immediate danger yet. As the room dissolved into anxious chatter, my phone buzzed again with another emergency alert. Slightly different this time. Emergency alert. Coastal anomalies reported statewide. Residents advised to stay away from all bodies of water. This is not an evacuation order. I stared at the message, a cold feeling settling in my stomach despite the August heat. Something was very wrong, and for the first time that morning, my carefully maintained skepticism began to crack. But it was still just Tuesday, and whatever was happening to Florida's coastline was probably just another environmental hiccup in a state famous for them. Nothing that wouldn't be explained by evening news. I was wrong. God, I was wrong. The drive home felt wrong. Traffic thinned to almost nothing as I got closer to my apartment building. As if the city were emptying itself out. The sky had darkened further, not with rain clouds but something murkier, like heavy smoke or fog rolling in from the west. The air smelled faintly of salt and something else, something metallic and unfamiliar. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing with alerts since I left the office. Emergency alert. Coastal evacuation advisory for Pinellas, Manatee, and Sarasota counties. Residents within 1 mile of shoreline advised to relocate inland. Then, 30 minutes later, emergency alert. Do not approach Gulf waters. Reports of unusual phenomena are under investigation. Follow official instructions only. I tried calling my mother in Orlando, but the call wouldn't connect. 3 attempts, 3 failures. Cell towers must be overloaded with everyone trying to reach family at once. I told myself I'd try again when I got home. The parking garage at my apartment complex was unusually full for midday on a Tuesday. Everyone sent home from work, I supposed. In the elevator, a woman I recognized from the 5th floor was crying quietly into her phone. "I don't care what they're saying. Mark." Cindy sent me the video before her phone went dead. "The beach house is just gone." She noticed me watching and turned away. Inside my apartment, I locked the door and switched on the TV. Every channel had the same split screen, one side showing news anchors with increasingly strained expressions, the other displaying maps of Florida with large sections of the coastline marked in red. Conflicting reports from emergency services in affected areas. A somber anchor was saying, "The governor's address, originally scheduled for noon, has been postponed. FEMA officials have arrived in Tallahassee, and the National Guard has been mobilized to assist with what authorities are now calling coastal security operations." The screen switched to helicopter footage of what should have been Petersburg Beach. Instead, there was a strange distortion where land met water, not erosion, not flooding, but something that made the camera lens seem to warp and struggle to focus. Due to technical difficulties, we're unable to clearly show the affected areas, the anchor explained. As the feed cut back to the studio, witnesses described the phenomenon as the coastline just not being there anymore. Though scientists caution against speculation until I changed channels. Same story, different words. One station was interviewing a geologist who kept adjusting his glasses nervously. "What we're seeing doesn't conform to any known patterns of coastal erosion or sea level rise," he explained. "The preliminary data suggests a localized distortion of." The interview abruptly cut to a commercial. My phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. "Hello, is this Daniel?" A woman's voice. Professional. Tight. "Yes." "Who's this?" "This is Sandra Kim with the Tampa Emergency Management Office. We're conducting a census of residents in high-rise buildings within the Tampa metro area." Are you currently at your primary residence? Yes, I said, unease crawling up my spine. What's going on? The news isn't saying much of anything useful. We're gathering information to coordinate response efforts. She replied, ignoring my question. How many people are currently in your unit? Just me. Do you have at least 3 days of food and water? Yes, probably. Please remain in your unit and monitor emergency broadcasts. Do not attempt to leave the city at this time. Roads are being reserved for emergency vehicles and critical personnel. Wait, I said. Are you saying we're under lockdown? What's happening to the coast? Pause. Sir, please follow instructions and remain calm. The situation is being managed. She hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, as another alert buzzed through. Emergency alert. Cellular communications may be limited. Conserve battery. Follow broadcast instructions. I went to the window, looking east toward that partial water view the real estate agent had been so proud of. The horizon was obscured now by that strange fog, thick and unnaturally still. It didn't move like weather. It just waited. My laptop pinged with an email notification. Work. Mendez had sent out an all-staff message. All employees are instructed to work remotely until further notice. VPN access will be monitored. Government authorities have advised us that this situation is temporary and under control. Regular business operations will continue. Your 9 a.m. team meetings will proceed via video conference. The absurdity of it nearly made me laugh. The coastline was apparently vanishing. Emergency management was conducting a census, and Mendez was worried about 9 a.m. meetings. I tried the internet, looking for more information. Twitter was a mess of panic, conspiracy theories, and increasingly bizarre accounts from coastal areas. Videos being shared showed the same visual distortion the news helicopter had captured, footage that seemed to glitch and warp when focused on the boundary between land and water. One video, posted by someone claiming to be in Naples, showed people walking toward the beach, then stopping abruptly. They didn't turn back. They just stopped, staring forward, completely still, as if frozen in place. The person filming kept repeating, "They won't move. Why won't they move?" Before the video cut out, Reddit was no better. Entire Florida-based subreddits had gone offline or were being aggressively moderated. Posts disappearing almost as quickly as they appeared. I tried my mother again. No connection. The building's intercom system crackled to life, making me jump. "Attention residents," came the building manager's voice, uncharacteristically somber. "By order of emergency services, all residents are advised to remain in their units. Water service may be interrupted temporarily. This is precautionary. Please do not attempt to leave the building or gather in common areas." I checked the faucet in my kitchen. The water ran, but it came out cloudy, with that same metallic smell I'd noticed in the air outside. I filled every container I could find anyway, some deep instinct overriding my persistent skepticism. Night fell, though it was hard to tell exactly when. The strange fog had thickened, obscuring the usual transition from day to evening. The power flickered twice but held. I kept the TV on, volume low, more for the company than the information, which had become increasingly repetitive and vague. Around 9 p.m., there was a knock at my door. I approached cautiously, checking the peephole. It was Mrs. Abernathy from 14C, an elderly widow who sometimes asked me to help with her groceries. "Mrs. Abernathy?" I called through the door, not opening it yet. "Are you okay, Daniel?" Her voice sounded thin, frightened. "Have you heard from anyone outside the city?" "No. The phones aren't working well." "Why?" "My daughter in Gainesville." She sent me a message before my phone stopped working properly. She said they're not telling us everything. She said it's not just the coast that's disappearing. A chill ran through me. What does that mean? I don't know. Her last message just said, "It's spreading inland." Her voice cracked. "I'm scared, Daniel. I'm sure they'll get it under control," I said, not believing it even as the words left my mouth. "They're probably just keeping things quiet to prevent panic." "Will you check on me in the morning?" she asked. "I don't want to be alone if things get worse." "Of course," I promised. First thing, after she left, I returned to the window, staring out at the fog that now completely obscured any view of the water. Had it moved closer? It was hard to tell in the darkness. My phone buzzed again. "Emergency alert. Remain indoors. Do not attempt to observe coastal areas. Comply with all instructions from authorities." I closed the blinds, suddenly not wanting to look outside anymore. The TV droned on with carefully scripted non-information. I muted it and tried to sleep, but my dreams were troubled by images of people standing frozen, staring at something I couldn't see, while a silent fog crept around them. Morning would bring answers. I told myself, this was Florida, we dealt with emergencies all the time. Hurricane warnings, sinkholes, toxic algae blooms. This would be explained by daylight. But as I drifted into uneasy sleep, a part of me already knew tomorrow would only bring more questions. And the answers, when they finally came, wouldn't be ones anyone wanted to hear. Because coastlines don't just vanish. And the authorities don't just activate emergency protocols for normal environmental events. Something was very wrong with Florida, and I was beginning to suspect we were far past the point where evacuation was possible. I woke to the sound of helicopters, not one, but several, their rotors beating the air in an irregular rhythm that suggested they weren't flying in formation. My phone said 6:18 a.m., but the light filtering through my blinds was wrong, too dim, too diffuse, as if the sun were struggling to penetrate that unnatural fog. The first thing I did was check my phone. No new messages, no missed calls, but the signal strength showed only 1 bar. The Wi-Fi was still working, though noticeably slower than usual. I opened my email, expecting more absurd instructions from Mendez about business continuity. Nothing new there, but something else caught my eye. An email from an address I didn't recognize. Sent at 3:42 a.m. The subject line read, "They're lying about the coast." I hesitated before opening it. Probably just spam or some conspiracy theorist who'd gotten hold of the company email list. But curiosity won out. The email contained only a link to a video file and the words, "Recorded at Clearwater Beach yesterday. They're taking down these videos as fast as they go up. This isn't about tides or erosion." Against my better judgment, I clicked. The video was shaky, clearly shot on a phone by someone running. Heavy breathing, the sound of feet on sand. The camera swung wildly between the beach ahead and the parking lot behind. A man's voice, breathless and terrified. "They're not letting anyone leave. Military's blocking all the roads out, but they need to be evacuating us, not keeping us here. Look at this." The camera steadied, pointing toward where the water should be. Instead, there was nothing. Not emptiness, not water, not land. Something that hurt to look at directly, like an absence that shouldn't exist. A blind spot in reality itself. The edges of it seemed to pulse and shift, extending tendrils toward the beach. And there were people, dozens of them, standing motionless at the edge of this anomaly, as if frozen in place. They just walk up to it and stop. The man narrated, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Been like this since yesterday. Nobody comes back. Oh God, They're coming. The camera swung around to show military vehicles entering the beach parking lot. Men in hazmat suits, not traditional military gear, were deploying from the trucks. The video cut out abruptly. I sat there, phone in hand, trying to process what I'd seen. It had to be fake, some elaborate hoax or digitally altered footage. Because the alternative, that something had replaced parts of Florida's coastline with a kind of void that somehow entranced people, was too absurd to contemplate. But the helicopters were still circling outside, their noise a constant reminder that something real and serious was happening. I remembered my promise to Mrs. Abernathy and went to check on her. 3 knocks. No response. I called her name. Knocked again. Nothing. I tried the handle, locked. She could be sleeping through the helicopter noise. I reasoned. Or perhaps she'd gone to stay with another neighbor. I try again later. Back in my apartment. I turned on the TV. Most channels were broadcasting the same message now, by order of the Department of Homeland Security and the Florida Emergency Management Agency. All residents are instructed to remain in their homes. Regular programming will resume when authorities determine it is safe to do so. This is not a test. Only one news channel was still broadcasting, and the anchor looked exhausted, his tie loosened, hair disheveled as if he'd been on air all night. Conflicting reports about the nature of the coastal anomalies. He was saying, scientific experts have been unable to reach affected areas to conduct proper assessments. Social media reports claiming to show the phenomena are largely unverified, and authorities caution against spreading misinformation. The broadcast cut to a press conference where a FEMA representative stood at a podium. What we're dealing with is a localized environmental disturbance. She stated flatly, there has been no vanishing of land as some irresponsible outlets have claimed. What we're seeing is an optical phenomenon related to atmospheric conditions unique to Florida's coastal geography. There is no cause for panic. It was the most obvious lie I'd ever heard. Her eyes kept darting to someone off camera, and her hands gripped the podium so tightly her knuckles were white. My phone buzzed with another alert. Emergency alert. Do not attempt to document or photograph coastal areas. Misinformation is a federal offense during declared emergencies. They were trying to control the narrative. That, more than anything else, convinced me that whatever was happening was far worse than they were admitting. I went to the window and carefully parted the blinds. The helicopters were visible now, military craft circling over downtown Tampa. The fog had thickened overnight, pressing against the glass like something alive, curling and shifting with unnatural deliberation. It wasn't behaving like any weather pattern I'd ever seen. Another buzz from my phone. This time, a text from an unknown number. If you're receiving this, you're in a zone scheduled for containment at noon. They're sealing off sections of the city. Get out now if you can. Head east, not west. El. Lisa from work. I tried calling the number back. No connection. The building's intercom crackled again. Attention residents. This is a mandatory shelter-in-place order. Do not attempt to leave the building. Military personnel will be conducting a floor-by-floor survey beginning at 10 a.m. Have identification ready. Compliance is mandatory. Military surveys? Containment zones? This was spiraling beyond a natural disaster or environmental anomaly. This was starting to feel like quarantine. Or worse, I had to make a decision. Stay as instructed, or try to leave. The rational part of my brain, the part that had always trusted systems and authorities, said to stay put. But a deeper instinct, something primal and afraid, was screaming at me to run. I packed quickly, clothes, water bottles, non-perishable food, my laptop, chargers, and the emergency cash I kept in my dresser. If this was an overreaction, I could always come back and feel foolish later. Better than the alternative. The hallway was eerily quiet as I locked my apartment door behind me. Most people were probably following instructions, staying inside as ordered. I hesitated outside Mrs. Abernathy's door, then knocked one more time. Still no answer. I couldn't wait any longer. Instead of taking the elevator, which could be shut down remotely, I headed for the emergency stairs, 14 floors down, moving as quietly as possible. The stairwell was concrete and fluorescent lights, utterly normal, and that normality felt obscene given what was happening outside. I reached the ground floor and peered through the small window in the door. The lobby was empty except for Marcus, the security guard, who sat at his desk as if it were any other day. But something was off about his posture, too rigid, too still. As I watched, he turned his head, slowly, mechanically, and stared directly at the emergency exit door where I stood. His face was expressionless, his eyes unfocused. He made no move to get up, just stared, unblinking. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. Emergency alert. Remain in your homes. Do not trust unofficial communications. Florida's coastline is secure. Marcus was still staring at the door, perfectly motionless. I couldn't go through the lobby. I retreated back up one flight and tried the door to the parking garage instead. It opened with a push. No alarm. The garage was dimly lit and quiet except for the distant sound of the helicopters. I kept close to the walls, moving toward my car, keys already in hand. Every instinct told me to hurry, but I forced myself to move deliberately. Quietly, I reached my car, unlocked it, slid inside. The normalcy of sitting in my own driver's seat was momentarily comforting. A familiar space in an increasingly alien world. I started the engine. The radio came on automatically. Mid-broadcast, residents advised that the military checkpoints are for your protection. Do not attempt to leave designated containment zones. The coastal anomalies are not spreading inland. Repeat, the anomalies are not spreading inland. Another lie. I could feel it in my bones. As I drove up the ramp toward the garage exit, I caught my first unfiltered glimpse of Tampa in daylight. The fog hung between the buildings like solid walls, sectioning off parts of the city. Military vehicles blocked major intersections. And in the distance, toward the west where the bay should be, the sky had a strange quality to it, a darkness that didn't belong, as if reality itself were thinning. I turned east, away from the water, away from that wrongness on the horizon. The streets were nearly empty, and those few people I did see were hurrying, heads down, clearly breaking the shelter-in-place order just as I was. At the first intersection, a military checkpoint loomed ahead. I turned before reaching it, taking side streets, working my way east with no clear destination beyond a way. My phone buzzed one last time before the signal died completely. Emergency alert. The coastline has not vanished. Reports to the contrary are false. Remain calm. Remain indoors. But I had seen the video. I had seen the fog, the military, the lies. My comfortable skepticism was gone, replaced by a cold certainty that whatever was happening to Florida wasn't stopping at the coast. And no one was coming to save us. I'd been driving for almost an hour, zigzagging through residential neighborhoods to avoid the military checkpoints that seemed to be multiplying across Tampa. My gas gauge hovered just below half tank. I hadn't thought to fill up before leaving, one of many oversights that now felt potentially fatal. The radio cycled through emergency broadcasts, each more detached from reality than the last. Weather phenomenon affecting coastal visibility. Temporary evacuation of specific zones for precautionary testing. rumors of military lockdown are categorically false. I turned it off after the third repetition. The silence was better than the lies. The farther east I drove, the fewer people I saw. Those who were outside moved with purpose, loading vehicles or hurrying along sidewalks with bags and children in tow. Nobody was stopping to help others. Nobody was waiting for official instructions anymore. I approached an intersection where a digital traffic sign had been reprogrammed. Instead of road closures or construction warnings, it now read, "Return to your homes. Compliance is mandatory." I turned north, away from the sign, onto a tree-lined street that would hopefully offer some cover from aerial surveillance. The helicopters were still audible, though more distant now. My phone remained useless, no signal, no data. The screen showed only the time, 9:47 a.m., and a string of missed emergency alerts that had downloaded before service cut out completely. The fog was different here, thinner but still present, hanging in pockets between buildings rather than the solid wall I'd seen downtown. I drove with my lights on, slowing at intersections to check for military vehicles. After another mile, I came upon something unexpected. A crowd of people gathered in a strip mall parking lot. They clustered around a man standing on the hood of a pickup truck, who appeared to be addressing them. Something made me stop. Information was now as valuable as fuel. I parked a short distance away and approached on foot, hanging back at the edge of the crowd. Satellite images before they cut the feeds. The man was saying, holding up a tablet, "This isn't just Florida. The entire Gulf Coast is experiencing the same phenomenon. From Mexico to the Florida Keys. Whatever this is, it's spreading, and it's spreading faster than they're admitting." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A woman near me clutched her children closer. "The military isn't here to help us," the man continued. "They're establishing a containment perimeter. I have sources inside FEMA. They don't know what this is, but they know it's not stopping." "What about the people who freeze?" someone called out. "The ones who just stop moving?" The man's expression darkened. "Those who make direct visual contact with the anomaly experience some kind of neurological shutdown. They don't respond to stimuli, and eventually, they..." He paused, clearly weighing his words. "They change." "Change how?" The crowd tensed. "They start walking into it, all at once, like they're being called, and they don't come back." A cold weight settled in my stomach. I thought of Marcus, staring unblinking at the door, perfectly still. "What does the government know?" someone else demanded. "They knew something was coming," the man replied. "Coastal monitoring stations detected abnormalities weeks ago, but it was classified. This wasn't some sudden event. They've been preparing, setting up containment protocols, positioning assets. They just didn't expect it to happen so fast, or spread so far inland." I pushed forward slightly. "What exactly is it? What's replacing the coastline?" The man found me in the crowd, his gaze sharp. "That's the question, isn't it? The official line is atmospheric distortion or localized spatial anomalies. But the truth? It's not from here. It's not natural. The best description I've heard is that it's like reality is being rewritten, replaced with something else, something that doesn't belong in our universe." A helicopter appeared in the distance, the sound of its rotors cutting through the tense quiet that had fallen over the crowd. "They're coming," the man said, climbing down from the truck. "Everyone needs to disperse. Head east if you can. But stay away from the interstate, they've blocked it. And whatever you do, don't look directly at the anomaly if you encounter it. That's how it gets you." The crowd scattered quickly, people running to vehicles or continuing on foot. I turned to head back to my car, but the man caught my arm. "You asked the right question," he said quietly. "Most people want to know how to escape. You wanted to know what it is. Does it matter what it is if we can't stop it? It matters if you want to survive." He pressed something into my hand, a small handheld radio. Frequency 87.7. It's not much, but it's the only source broadcasting the truth right now. Good luck. He disappeared into the dispersing crowd as the helicopter grew louder. Back in my car, I examined the radio, an old-school emergency hand crank model, the kind recommended for hurricane kits. I turned it on and tuned to 87.7. Static crackled. Then a voice emerged, confirmation that the I-75 corridor has been sealed by military forces. Refugee camps are being established in Ocala, but sources on the ground report they are already at capacity. The phenomenon continues to spread inland at approximately 1.7 miles per hour. Areas within 50 miles of the original coastline are now considered lost. Lost. The word echoed in my mind as I started the car and pulled back onto the road. Tampa was well within that 50-mile zone. I drove aimlessly for a while, listening to the broadcast, which alternated between updates on the spreading anomaly and speculation about its nature. Scientists interviewed described it as a localized breakdown of standard physical laws and potentially extradimensional in origin. None of it made sense, and all of it was terrifying. At 11:23 a.m., the power went out across the region. I watched as traffic lights died and buildings went dark. The hand crank radio continued to function. We're receiving reports of total infrastructure failure throughout Central Florida. This is consistent with previous patterns observed in coastal zones approximately 4 to 6 hours before they were completely overtaken. If you are receiving this broadcast and are still within the Tampa Bay metropolitan area, you must evacuate immediately. This is not a drill. The phenomenon accelerates dramatically after power failure. The road ahead was becoming congested as more people took to their cars. The shelter-in-place order now obviously suicidal. I turned onto a side street, searching for a less crowded route east. That's when my car's electronics flickered. The dashboard lights dimmed, then brightened, then went out completely. The engine sputtered and died, rolling to a stop in the middle of the empty street. I tried the ignition. Nothing. Not even the clicking of a dead battery. Just silence. Other cars nearby were experiencing the same problem. I could see drivers frantically turning keys, pounding steering wheels, eventually abandoning their vehicles to continue on foot. Through my windshield, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The fog was changing, no longer formless and diffuse. It was coalescing into distinct tendrils, probing between buildings. And within it, shapes moved, human silhouettes walking in perfect unison, their outlines blurred and distorted. My phone, dead for hours, suddenly lit up with one final emergency alert. Emergency alert! Do not look at the sky. Do not record audio. Florida's coastline has not vanished. I looked up. The sky above was no longer blue, no longer anything recognizable. It rippled like the surface of disturbed water, colors that had no place in an Earth atmosphere swirling and bleeding into each other. The truth was undeniable now. Florida's coastline hadn't just vanished. It had been replaced, and whatever had taken its place was still hungry, consuming reality itself as it spread inland. I grabbed the hand crank radio and what supplies I could carry from the car. The broadcast was breaking up now. The voice distorted. Phenomenon appears to be static consciousness itself. Static, not destruction but transformation. Static, God help us all. As the radio died in my hands, I understood with perfect clarity that running was pointless. The anomaly wasn't just coming. It was already here. My legs burned as I ran, backpack bouncing against my spine, lungs struggling in the increasingly thick air. Around me, others fled on foot as well, strangers united only by the primal need to escape. Nobody spoke. Words seemed pointless now. The anomaly's advance was visible in ways that defied comprehension. Streets behind me that had been normal minutes ago were now bathed in that strange, rippling light. Buildings shimmered at their edges, as if reality itself was becoming fluid, malleable, and still those fog tendrils reached forward. Searching, alive with purpose. I had been moving east for nearly an hour when I encountered the first military checkpoint that wasn't abandoned. 3 armored vehicles blocked the road. Soldiers in hazmat suits rather than standard uniforms standing guard with weapons raised. Behind them, a makeshift barricade of concrete barriers stretched across the 4-lane road. The soldiers watched impassively as our ragged group approached, about 30 civilians, mostly on foot, some on bicycles or other non-motorized transport. Everything with an engine or electronic components had failed. "Stop where you are," boomed a voice through a megaphone. "This area is restricted. Return to your designated shelter points." Nobody moved. Return where? To the advancing wall of unreality? The absurdity of the order hung in the air. A woman near me, clutching a small child to her chest, stepped forward. "Please," she called out. "We need to get through. It's coming. You know it's coming. Return to your designated shelter points." The voice repeated, mechanical and inhuman in its cadence. "This is your final warning." A man in our group broke ranks, sprinting toward the barricade. He made it perhaps 20 feet before the crack of a rifle shot echoed across the pavement. He crumpled mid-stride. Screams erupted. People scattered, diving behind abandoned cars or fleeing back the way we'd come. I ducked behind a pickup truck, heart hammering against my ribs. "Remain calm. Military personnel will escort you to secure facilities. Compliance is mandatory." From my hiding place, I peered around the truck's bumper. The soldiers were advancing now, moving with the precise synchronization of extensive training or something else entirely. Their hazmat suits obscured any hint of humanity, making them look like extensions of the machinery they protected. I glanced behind us, where the anomaly continued its inexorable approach. The rippling light played across buildings now only a few blocks away. Then I looked ahead, at the soldiers, the barricade, the supposed safety beyond, and I realized they weren't keeping us out. They were keeping us in. This wasn't rescue. This was containment, quarantine. We weren't being saved. We were being sacrificed, confined within a perimeter while whatever was happening ran its course. The thought crystallized with such clarity that I nearly laughed. A drain culvert ran beneath the road to my right, partially hidden by overgrown grass. Without conscious decision, I was moving toward it, crouching low, using the abandoned vehicles as cover. The soldiers were occupied with rounding up the more visible members of our group. Nobody noticed as I slipped into the concrete tunnel, the brackish water soaking my shoes. The culvert was just large enough to crawl through, a claustrophobic tube stretching into darkness. The water was cold, smelling of mold and something else, that same metallic tang that had permeated the air since yesterday. I pulled out my phone, using its screen for weak illumination as I crawled forward on hands and knees. Time became meaningless in that dark passage. My knees were raw, my clothes soaked, but I kept moving, driven by the certainty that stopping meant death, or whatever fate was worse than death that awaited those caught by the anomaly. Eventually, the tunnel widened, opening into a larger drainage channel. I emerged into gray daylight, on the other side of the military blockade. I had bypassed their perimeter. I stood shakily, surveying my surroundings. I was in what appeared to be an industrial area, warehouses, loading docks, chain link fences, and it was empty, utterly abandoned. No military, no civilians, no movement at all. My phone was still clutched in my hand, the screen now dark. The device was completely dead, yet somehow felt heavier than before, as if the metal and glass had become more substantial, more present. I dropped it into a puddle, suddenly repulsed by its touch. The air here was clearer, the strange fog noticeably absent. Had I made it beyond the anomaly's reach, or was this just a temporary reprieve? The calm before an even greater storm? I needed to keep moving. East, always east, away from the coast, away from Tampa. My clothes were wet, my body exhausted, but stopping wasn't an option. A sound caught my attention, the rumble of an engine. Something still working in this dead zone of failed technology. I moved toward it cautiously, navigating between warehouses until I spotted the source. A convoy of military trucks. Their diesel engines apparently immune to whatever had disabled other vehicles. They were parked in a row before a large warehouse. Soldiers loading crates and equipment with urgent efficiency. This wasn't a checkpoint or a rescue operation. This was evacuation. The military was pulling out. I crept closer, using a dumpster for cover. Their conversation carried on the still air. Tracking says we have less than 2 hours before total coverage. What about the civilian containment? Secondary priority. Assets and research data come first. Jesus, there are thousands of people back there. We're thousands of people. Command says the assimilation rate is accelerating. Assimilation. The word sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with my wet clothes. What about the Miami scenario? Any confirmation? Confirmed at 1,100 hours. Total communication blackout. Same pattern we saw in Tampa yesterday. It's not just the Gulf Coast anymore. Miami, the opposite coast. It wasn't just spreading inland from the west. It was surrounding us, closing in from multiple directions. They're saying Orlando is next, then the eastern seaboard. DoD is establishing a new containment line at the Georgia border. But nobody thinks it'll hold. What the hell is this thing? Above our pay grade. Sergeant, load the trucks and don't ask questions. One of the soldiers moved away from the group, heading around the side of the warehouse toward where I was hiding. I pressed myself against the dumpster, barely breathing. He paused, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. His hazmat hood was pulled back, revealing a young face, barely out of his teens, eyes haunted by whatever he'd witnessed. "I know you're there," he said quietly, not looking in my direction. Behind the dumpster, I froze, muscles tensing for flight. "I'm not going to report you," he continued, taking a long drag. "No point anymore. If you're smart, you'll head northeast. They think the Appalachians might slow it down, might buy a few more days." "What is it?" I whispered, finding my voice. "What's happening to Florida?" He laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. "Florida's gone. Man, what you're seeing is just the afterimage. Like when a light burns out but you can still see it for a few seconds. Whatever's replacing it." He trailed off, looking skyward. The eggheads have theories. Extra-dimensional incursion. Reality collapse. Doesn't matter what you call it. The result's the same. How do we stop it? His eyes met mine for the first time. And the emptiness, there was answer enough. We don't. That's what they're not telling anyone. This isn't some disaster we recover from. This is extinction. A shout came from the warehouse. The soldier dropped his cigarette, grinding it under his boot. "Northeast," he repeated. "Stay off main roads. Militaries shooting anyone trying to leave the containment zone. They're afraid we'll spread it, like it's a fucking virus. He turned to go, then paused. And if you start seeing things that can't exist, or if the sky looks wrong, or if you feel a pull toward something you can't explain, end it quickly. Trust me, it's better than the alternative. He rejoined his unit without looking back. Minutes later, the convoy departed, heading north in a cloud of diesel exhaust. I remained hidden until the sound of engines faded completely. Then I stood, my decision made. Northeast, through industrial zones and back roads, avoiding checkpoints and population centers. The Appalachians. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all I had. As I began walking, I noticed something had changed. My shadow on the ground was wrong, too sharp, too dark, as if cast by a light source much stronger than the diffuse gray daylight. And it didn't move quite in sync with my body, lagging just fractionally behind. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel it following, the anomaly, the replacement, the end of everything familiar. Florida's coastline hadn't just vanished. Florida itself was vanishing, piece by piece, person by person, and I was running out of places to run. The emergency broadcast system had become a constant companion, its jarring tones punctuating what remained of normality like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. I'd grown to hate it and depend on it in equal measure. When it cut out mid-alert, the silence felt wrong. I held my breath, waiting for the transmission to resume, for the voice to continue its instructions about evacuation routes and containment zones. Nothing came, just dead air. I checked my phone again, no signal. The battery indicator showed 17%, a resource more precious than cash now. I powered it down, saving what little charge remained for when I truly needed it. If that moment would even come. They're not coming back on, are they? Said a woman with salt-crusted shoes and hollow eyes. We'd been traveling together since I found her hiding in an abandoned gas station 2 days ago. She never volunteered her name, and I never asked. Names seemed like artifacts from another time. The coastline has been secured. Return to your homes. I repeated the last message we'd heard. What does that even mean? Secured how? Against what? She just shook her head, staring down the empty highway stretching before us. 6 lanes of abandoned vehicles pointed north like a compass needle, all their occupants having continued on foot when the gridlock became permanent. We were part of that human exodus now. Just 2 more desperate faces in a stream of people fleeing from something none of us could name. We should keep moving, I said. Another 15 miles and we'll reach the state border. You still think state lines mean anything? She asked. No mockery in her voice, just genuine curiosity. You think whatever's happening stops at a line on a map? I had no answer. I'd been clinging to that hope that somehow Georgia would be different, that the impossible things reshaping Florida would respect human boundaries. Deep down, I knew better. We walked in silence for an hour, picking our way between cars. The sun hung unnaturally bright in a cloudless sky, but the temperature had been dropping steadily for days. It was May in Florida, but it felt like November, near a jackknifed semi-truck. We came upon a group of about 20 people gathered in a loose circle. They had the look of those who'd been on the road longer than us, leaner, dirtier, more weathered. But they had something we didn't: purpose. They were listening to a man in what remained of a military uniform. Confirmed reports from Tampa, Miami, and Jacksonville. He was saying as we approached, the phenomenon is accelerating. Initial estimates gave us weeks, but current projections indicate total geographic displacement within 3 days. A murmur ran through the crowd. Someone shouted, "What about the safe zones they promised?" The soldier's laugh was bitter. The Ocala Command Center fell 6 hours ago. There are no more safe zones in Florida. What about outside Florida? I asked, stepping forward. All eyes turned to me. The soldier assessed me with a gaze that had seen too much. The phenomenon doesn't respect state boundaries. We've lost communication with southern Georgia, Alabama as far north as Montgomery, and about 60 miles into the Gulf. Beyond that, he shrugged. Nobody's talking anymore. What is it? The woman beside me asked. What's actually happening? The soldier looked at her, then at each face in the circle. You haven't seen it yet, have you? The actual displacement. Heads shook. We'd all seen the effects, the panic, the evacuation, the military cordons. We'd felt the wrongness in the air and heard the impossible sounds in the distance. But whatever was happening to Florida's coastline, and now, apparently, beyond, remained a second-hand horror, described in whispers and fragments. Count yourselves lucky, he said quietly. When it takes an area, the land just stops being there. But it's not like erosion or sinking. It's like reality itself gets rewritten. One moment solid ground, the next. He trailed off, eyes fixed on something distant. The next what? Someone pressed. The next, something else. Something that looks like water but isn't. Something that doesn't reflect light right. Something that moves like it's breathing. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the unnatural cold. We should go, the woman beside me whispered, tugging my sleeve. Now. But before we could move, a low rumble passed beneath our feet. Not an earthquake, more like a vast vibration. As if something massive were moving underground. The gathered crowd broke apart, people stumbling to maintain balance. It's happening, the soldier said, his voice flat, faster than we thought. In the distance behind us, where the highway curved back toward what had once been Tampa, a strange fog was rolling in, not white or gray, but a shimmering, oily black that seemed to swallow light. It moved against the wind, advancing with deliberate purpose. Run, the soldier said simply. Due north. Don't stop for anything. What followed was chaos. The group scattered, some freezing in terror, others sprinting immediately. The woman and I ran, joining the stream of people fleeing north along the highway. I didn't look back, not at first. I counted my footfalls, focused on my breathing, pretended this was just another morning jog before the world broke apart. Look, she gasped after we'd run perhaps half a mile. Against my better judgment, I turned. The black fog had overtaken the group we'd left behind. But it wasn't just obscuring them, it was replacing them. Where the fog passed, there simply wasn't highway anymore. No people, no abandoned cars. Just a churning darkness that wasn't fog or water or anything I had words for. And it was gaining on us. We can't outrun it, she said, her voice oddly calm. Not if it wants us. I grabbed her arm. We have to try. Come on. We ran until our lungs burned, joining others in a desperate northward migration. The landscape around us began to change in subtle ways. Road signs displaying impossible destinations. Trees bending at unnatural angles. The very quality of light taking on a greenish, underwater cast though the sun still blazed overhead. The military presence that had been so conspicuous in previous days was now entirely absent.
No checkpoints. No helicopters or overhead.
No emergency vehicles. Just civilians, running. As night began to fall, we found temporary shelter in an abandoned convenience store alongside a dozen others. No one spoke much. Some wept quietly. Others stared into nothing, shock rendering them almost catatonic. I tried my phone again, still no signal. Battery now at 12%. but the GPS function flickered to life momentarily, and what it showed made no sense. According to the map, we were 20 miles offshore in the Gulf of Mexico. "They're lying to us," a man muttered, looking over my shoulder at the phone. "The government, the military, they knew what was coming." "This isn't a government cover-up," I said, more sharply than intended. "This is something else, something bigger." "Then what is it?" he demanded. "What the hell is happening to Florida?" Before I could respond, a new sound cut through the night, the emergency broadcast tone. Coming from a weather radio someone had managed to keep charged. We all fell silent, gathering around it like supplicants before an oracle. Through static, a calm voice announced, "The coastline has been secured. Return to your homes. Florida welcomes you home." The same message as before, but something was wrong with the cadence, the pronunciation, as if whoever, whatever, was speaking had learned English phonetically, without understanding. "That's not right," the woman beside me whispered, and I knew she didn't mean just the message. Outside, the night grew unnaturally dark as the black fog rolled in from the south. Through the store's windows, I watched it approach. It moved with intent, almost intelligence. This wasn't a natural disaster. This wasn't military or government. This was something looking at us, considering us, and deciding. "We leave at first light," I told the others. "Whatever happens, stay together." But even as I spoke, I was struck by the sudden, horrible certainty that there would be no first light, not as we understood it. The emergency broadcast crackled once more, the voice now distinctly inhuman. "Florida has always been ours. Florida will always be ours." And then the power failed completely, leaving us in darkness as the thing that had once been our coastline came to claim what remained. 7 days since the first alert, or maybe 8. Time had become elastic, stretching and contracting in ways that made watches and phone timestamps seem like quaint artifacts from another era. I'd been marking the days with a pen on my forearm. But yesterday, or what I thought was yesterday, I noticed the earliest marks had vanished, replaced by a pattern of tiny dots I didn't remember making. The abandoned university building had become my sanctuary for the past 3 days. Sturdy brick walls, minimal windows, and enough preserved food in the cafeteria freezers to last a while. I wasn't the first to discover it, but I appeared to be the last remaining. The others had left one by one, drawn by rumors of military extraction points or family members spotted nearby. None had returned. I'd chosen the geology department as my base of operations. Something about the rock samples and mineral displays provided an illusion of solidity in a world becoming increasingly fluid. The irony wasn't lost on me. Seeking comfort in earth sciences while the very earth beneath Florida was being rewritten. The water table readings make no sense. Dr.
Kavita Mehta said,
pushing her glasses up with ink-stained fingers. "Look at this." I'd found the researcher huddled in her office 2 days ago, surrounded by printouts, her computer running on backup power. She hadn't questioned my presence, merely nodded as if expecting me, and continued working. I still wasn't entirely convinced she was real. She spread a map across her desk, covered in handwritten notations and calculations. These blue areas showed standard aquifer behavior 3 weeks ago. Now they're registering as, well, not water, not anything we have instruments to measure. Salt water intrusion? I suggested, clinging to rational explanations despite everything I'd seen. Her laugh was sharp and mirthless. "I wish. Salt water follows known physical properties. This," she jabbed a finger at the map, "this is like trying to measure a dream with a ruler." I studied her face, the dark circles under her eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw. You knew this was coming, didn't you? Not this specifically, but something. She rubbed her eyes. My research team noticed anomalies in the coastal bedrock samples last year. Microscopic changes in fundamental structure, as if limestone that had been stable for millions of years was remembering how to be something else. Why didn't you warn people? We tried, published our findings, alerted state geological authorities. She shrugged, a gesture of exhausted resignation. They said our equipment must be malfunctioning. Outside, the sky had taken on the now familiar greenish tinge, like being underwater but still able to breathe. The campus quad was visible from her window, empty fountains, abandoned backpacks, a lone bicycle rusting on its side. No movement except the strange rippling of shadows that no longer corresponded to the objects casting them. The emergency alert system crackled to life suddenly, making us both jump. The old radio on her bookshelf had been silent for days. "Stand by for important information," announced a voice that almost sounded human. Almost. "Do not trust previous instructions. Florida does not exist." We stared at each other across the desk. The broadcast continued. "Florida is a transitional space. Florida has always been a transitional space." Then silence again. "What does that mean? Florida doesn't exist?" I asked, my voice sounding strange in my own ears. "Dr. Meta's expression was distant. Coastlines are liminal spaces, neither fully land nor fully sea. Boundaries between states of being." She looked down at her map. "Maybe whatever's happening wasn't random. Maybe Florida was chosen because it's already a peninsula, already halfway to being something else." I wanted to dismiss this as academic theorizing, but after what I'd witnessed on the highway, nothing seemed implausible anymore. "I need some air," I said, though air no longer felt like the right word for what we were breathing. She nodded absently, already lost in her calculations again. The hallway outside her office stretched longer than I remembered, the emergency exit signs glowing with a pulsing intensity that made my eyes water. I blinked, and suddenly I was standing in my apartment kitchen, coffee maker gurgling cheerfully, morning light streaming through the blinds. My heart stopped. Had it all been a nightmare? Was I back before the first alert, given some impossible second chance? The radio on my kitchen counter crackled. Minor coastal anomalies reported along the Gulf Coast. Authorities advise normal activities may continue. The first broadcast, the very first one. I lunged for my phone. The date showed 7 days ago. "No," I whispered. "This isn't real." The coffee maker began to overflow, but what spilled onto the counter wasn't coffee. It was dark and thick, moving with purpose rather than following gravity. I backed away. "This isn't real," I repeated, louder. "I'm in the university. This is some kind of episode." The apartment walls rippled in response, and then dissolved entirely. I was back in the geology department hallway, on my knees, cold tile against my palms. A time slip, that's what Dr. Meta had called them. Moments where reality folded back on itself, replaying fragments of the past. They were happening more frequently now. Yesterday, I'd experienced 3, finding myself momentarily back in my car during the gridlock. Then in the convenience store as the black fog approached. Then back in my childhood bedroom for a few disorienting seconds. "They're getting stronger," Dr. Meta said from her doorway, watching me struggle to my feet. "The time slips. It suggests the temporal distortions are accelerating along with the geographic ones." "In English, please," I said, though I understood her perfectly well. I just needed something normal, something human. Scientific jargon felt like a lifeline to the world before. Time is becoming as unreliable as space. She translated. The coastline vanishing was just the beginning. Now the boundaries between past, present, and future are eroding too. Back in her office, she showed me her latest calculations, pages of complex equations and diagrams that meant nothing to me. But her conclusion was clear enough. This isn't just about Florida disappearing. It's about Florida being replaced. By what? By something that was here before, or will be here after, or exists alongside us but perpendicular to our reality. She shook her head. Our vocabulary isn't equipped for this, but I think something is reclaiming territory. That night, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the black fog rolling in, consuming the highway behind us. I kept thinking about the last emergency broadcast. Florida does not exist. What if it was true? Not metaphorically, but literally. What if Florida, the Florida we knew, had been a temporary arrangement? A brief geological interlude between vastly different states of being? Dawn brought no sunlight, just a gradual lightening of the greenish darkness outside. I went to check on Dr. Meta to see what new theories morning had inspired. Her office was empty, not just vacant, but stripped of any evidence she'd ever been there. No maps on the walls, no equations on the whiteboards. Even her coffee mug was gone. Only a single sheet of paper remained on the otherwise bare desk. Covered in her distinctive handwriting, the transition is 43% complete. They're not erasing Florida, they're converting it. We are not being destroyed. We are being translated. Below this was a series of coordinates and a final line. Don't follow me. What waits at the end isn't for humans to witness. I folded the paper carefully and placed it in my pocket. Outside, the campus had changed overnight. The buildings remained, but the spaces between them had lengthened, twisted. Palm trees now grew from the sides of walls. Water, or something resembling water, pooled in defiance of gravity. The emergency broadcast system never returned that day, but something else did, an awareness, a presence in the air itself, watching and waiting as Florida continued its transformation into something that had never been meant for human habitation. And somewhere deep inside, I felt myself beginning to change too. The university that had been my sanctuary was becoming something else entirely. Corridors stretched into impossible geometries. Stairwells spiraled down far deeper than the 3 floors the building should have contained. In the cafeteria, I found food that had begun to rearrange itself at the molecular level, bread with the consistency of mercury, fruit that pulsed with faint bioluminescence. It was time to leave. I gathered what remained of my supplies, a half-empty water bottle, a flashlight with fading batteries, Dr. Meta's coordinates, and a campus map that no longer matched the territory it represented. The clothes I'd been wearing for days had begun to feel strange against my skin, as if the fabric was slowly merging with my body. I tried not to think about that. Outside, Florida had become unrecognizable. The sky hung low and heavy, not quite clouds but something denser, with subtle movement patterns that reminded me of cerebral cortex imagery. The ground beneath my feet had a slight give to it, like walking on flesh rather than soil. Trees still stood, but their geometry had altered, branches growing in spirals that hurt my eyes to follow, roots exposed above ground and twisting like tentacles seeking purchase. I needed to find others, needed to confirm I wasn't the only one experiencing this new reality, needed to hear a human voice that wasn't my own increasingly scattered thoughts. The campus opened onto what had once been University Boulevard. The road now undulated gently, its asphalt surface split by pulsing blue veins that leaked a clear fluid smelling faintly of ammonia. Abandoned vehicles remained, but they'd begun to sink into the road surface as if being slowly digested. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding flat and muffled in the dense air. "Is anyone still here?" No answer came, but something shifted in my peripheral vision. I turned to see a figure standing about 50 yards away, human-shaped, watching me. I approached cautiously, hand raised in greeting. As I drew closer, subtle wrongness became apparent. The person, a man in what had once been business attire, stood too still. His proportions seemed slightly off, his limbs a fraction too long. When he finally moved, the motion was too fluid, joints bending in ways human anatomy shouldn't allow. "Are you real?" he asked, his voice modulating oddly, as if he were speaking underwater. "I think so," I replied, stopping at what felt like a safe distance. "Are you?" He considered this question with unnatural stillness. "I was," he finally said. "Now I'm adapting." "Adapting to what?" I asked, though I already knew. "To what Florida is becoming." He gestured around us. "To what we're all becoming." "I'm not becoming anything," I insisted, though even as I spoke, I was aware of the changes in my own body, the slight numbness in my extremities. The way colors seemed to have additional dimensions now. The occasional sensation that my thoughts were leaking outside the boundary of my skull. He tilted his head at an impossible angle. "You're resisting. That makes it worse." His eyes, I now noticed, had no pupils, just flat discs of blue-black that reflected nothing. "Those who accept the change suffer less." I took an involuntary step backward. What happened to everyone else? There were thousands of people here. Some ran, some died, some adapted. He blinked with vertical eyelids. Some were taken for study. Taken? By whom? Instead of answering, he pointed to a military convoy visible in the distance, moving along what remained of the interstate. Unlike the abandoned vehicles surrounding us, these were operational, their engines producing a rhythmic thrumming rather than normal combustion sounds. "They're still trying to fight it," he said, with something like pity in his strange voice. "The military? They're mounting a defense." The laugh that emerged from him didn't sound human. "Not fighting against, fighting for." He turned those disturbing eyes back to me. "They worship it now." Before I could ask what he meant, gravity shifted suddenly. I stumbled as the ground beneath me seemed to tilt, though visually everything remained level. The man, or what had once been a man, maintained his footing effortlessly, his body compensating in ways that defied physics. "You should go to them," he said. "You're still mostly human. They might take you." "Take me where?" "To the collection point, where they're gathering what remains of the old world." He looked up at the churning sky. "Before the transition is complete." The military convoy had changed direction, now heading toward what my distorted sense of geography suggested was east, though cardinal directions had become increasingly meaningless as Florida's landscape rearranged itself. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I remember being like you, afraid, confused." He began to walk away with that too fluid gait. "You don't have much time left to make a choice." I watched him disappear behind a building that seemed to bend inward as he approached, accommodating his passage in a way solid structures shouldn't. The encounter left me shaken but provided something I'd been lacking: direction. If the military was still operational, still collecting people, perhaps there was some organized response to whatever was happening. Perhaps Dr. Meta's coordinates led to this collection point. I began walking toward where I'd seen the convoy, trying to maintain a straight path despite the increasingly unreliable nature of space. Distance had become subjective. Landmarks that appeared miles away could suddenly loom directly ahead after just a few steps, while others receded no matter how long I walked toward them. Time behaved similarly. The sun, or what passed for it now, moved erratically across the sky, sometimes freezing in place for what felt like hours, other times racing from horizon to horizon in minutes. My watch had stopped working days ago, the hands spinning freely regardless of gravity's orientation. After what might have been hours or merely moments, I reached a military checkpoint that had been established at a highway interchange. Concrete barriers surrounded a collection of tents and vehicles, all marked with insignia I didn't recognize, not standard military symbols, but elaborate geometric patterns that seemed to shift subtly when I wasn't looking directly at them. Soldiers in hazmat-like gear patrolled the perimeter. Their movements were synchronized in a way that struck me as ritualistic rather than tactical. As I approached, one broke formation and walked toward me, rifle held not in a threatening position but angled downward, almost ceremonially. "Civilian located," the soldier said, voice distorted through the breathing apparatus. "Status, pre-transition." Another soldier approached, this one with more elaborate markings on the suit. "Percentage." The first soldier studied me with an unnerving intensity. Approximately 22% converted. Still viable for the collection. "Bring them in." The officer turned away, then paused. "Have they seen it?" "Negative. Visual contamination appears minimal." I found my voice. "Seen what?" "What's happening to Florida?" Both soldiers stared at me through their faceplates, which I now realized weren't traditional visors but some kind of translucent membrane that pulsed slightly with their breathing. "Florida is being claimed," the officer said finally, as was always intended. Inside the compound, I saw perhaps 50 civilians in various states of shock or resignation. Some appeared physically normal. Others displayed subtle alterations similar to the man I'd encountered: elongated limbs, too fluid movements, skin with a faintly iridescent quality. Military personnel moved among them, taking readings with devices that resembled medical equipment but produced sounds like distant whale song. A large screen dominated the central tent, displaying a map of what had once been Florida. Nearly half the state was covered in shifting darkness, with tendrils extending outward in fractal patterns. Text scrolled beneath the image. "Transition 43% complete." The same percentage DR. Meta had written in her final note. "What is this transition?" I asked a nearby soldier. "The reclamation," came the reply, spoken with reverence rather than military crispness. "Florida is returning to its rightful state, and so are we." I thought of the man with pupilless eyes, of DR. Meta's vanishing, of my own body's subtle betrayals. This wasn't just geographic change, it was transformation on a fundamental level. As if reading my thoughts, the emergency broadcast system suddenly activated throughout the compound, speakers crackling to life with that now familiar tone. But instead of a human or even humanoid voice, what emerged was a sound that bypassed my ears entirely, resonating directly in my mind. "The transition is 43% complete. All is proceeding as destined. Florida has always been ours." And deep within me, something that was no longer entirely me began to understand. The military compound operated with a rhythm that mimicked normalcy without achieving it. Soldiers maintained patrol schedules, scientists collected data, and refugees were processed through intake protocols, all with the mechanical precision of a system pretending the world wasn't ending around it. I've been assigned a cot in Tent C, alongside 20 other pre-transition civilians, their clinical term for those of us still mostly human. My intake examiner had categorized me as 23% converted, up a percentage point from the initial assessment. No one would explain what these percentages meant, but the slight increase seemed to concern them. "You're fighting it," said Dr. Wayland, the lead scientist who'd taken a particular interest in my case. His clipboard held papers covered in symbols that weren't entirely mathematical. Most people either surrender completely or resist completely. You're doing something in between. Is that bad? I asked, rolling down my sleeve after yet another blood draw. The needle marks no longer bled, instead. They sealed instantly with a faint blue luminescence before fading. It's unusual, he replied, studying my arm with clinical detachment. Most resistors are at 10% or lower. Most acceptors are already above 50%. You're ambivalent. I thought about the changes I'd been noticing, how sounds had begun to carry emotional information, how I sometimes knew which direction led to water without any visual cues, how my dreams were increasingly populated by geometries that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. What happens at 100%? I finally asked. Dr. Whalen's expression changed subtly. Transcendence, he said, with the reverence of a convert. Then, catching himself, he added in a more professional tone, that's what we're observing, at least. Complete neural and physiological adaptation to the new Florida paradigm. And those people, what happens to them? They leave, he said simply. They go to the reclaimed territories and don't return. A faint smile. They don't need to. That night, couldn't sleep. The sounds from outside had changed again. The distant rumbling that had become background noise now carried patterns. Almost like language. The darkness visible through the tent flaps seemed thicker, more substantial, and overhead, strange lights raced across the sky in formations too precise to be natural. An announcement woke us before dawn. All remaining civilians will be relocated to Central Collection Point. Departure in 30 minutes. Bring only essential personal items. The compound dissolved into controlled chaos as tents were struck. Equipment packed, and people herded toward transport vehicles. Unlike civilian evacuation attempts I'd witnessed earlier, this operation had the precision of long planning. They'd been prepared for this moment. Where are we going? I asked a passing soldier. Homestead, he replied without breaking stride. Last secure facility in Florida. Homestead, the massive air reserve base south of Miami. If it still existed, it would represent the largest remaining military presence in the state. But it was also dangerously close to where the phenomenon had first appeared. As we boarded the transports, heavy military vehicles with modifications I didn't recognize, I noticed something odd about our route on the driver's navigation screens. They weren't plotting a course around the affected areas. They were plotting a course through them. This is wrong, I said to the woman seated beside me. Another pre-transition case. Homestead is southeast. We're heading west. She stared at me with eyes that had begun to change, her pupils elongating slightly into vertical slits. They said Homestead. She repeated flatly. Trust the process. The convoy moved with unnerving speed along roads that shouldn't have been passable. Outside the reinforced windows, I watched Florida transform with each mile. Lakes hung suspended in midair, their waters forming perfect spheres that defied gravity. Trees had fused into cathedral-like structures, their canopies merging into a single undulating membrane. The sky itself seemed closer, pressing down with colors that human retinas were never designed to process. At what my internal compass insisted was the halfway point of our journey. All communications equipment in the vehicle suddenly activated simultaneously. Radio, satellite phone, even personal devices that shouldn't have had power or signal. This is an emergency broadcast, announced a voice that began as standard military cadence but subtly shifted as it continued, becoming more resonant, more layered. Coordinates for safe extraction have been identified. All remaining personnel proceed immediately to 25.
4867 °N.
80.
4801 stopni.
Repeat. 25.
4867 degrés N.
80.
4801 stopni.
I recognized those numbers. They matched the coordinates Dr. Meta had left behind. Driver. Confirm course correction. Ordered our escort. A captain whose name tag had been removed. Confirmed. Rerouting to broadcast coordinates. I leaned forward. Those aren't Homestead's coordinates. Where are you taking us? The captain turned to regard me with an expression of perfect serenity. To safety. You're lying, I said, pulling out the paper with Dr. Meta's handwriting. These are the same coordinates. She warned me not to follow, said what waits there isn't for humans to witness. A strange smile spread across the captain's face. Dr. Meta completed her transition 2 days ago. She serves a new purpose now. The woman beside me gripped my arm with unexpected strength. Stop fighting, she whispered. It's so much easier when you stop fighting. The convoy continued its inexorable progress toward the coordinates. The landscape outside becoming increasingly alien. Physical laws seemed optional here. Water flowed uphill. Light bent around objects in impossible arcs. And occasionally I glimpsed things moving in patterns that suggested more dimensions than should exist. For hours into our journey, we reached a massive government facility unlike any military installation I'd ever seen. Circular in design, it sprawled across what had once been Everglades but was now a crystalline plain that shimmered with its own internal light. The architecture combined familiar utilitarian government buildings with newer structures that followed non-Euclidean principles. Angles that didn't add up to 180 degrees. Corridors that looped back on themselves despite maintaining straight paths. As we were processed through security checkpoints, I noticed the personnel here were much further along in their transitions. Many had physical alterations so profound they barely resembled humans. Skin with tessellating patterns, limbs that could bend in impossible ways, eyes that reflected light in colors that shouldn't exist. Welcome to the threshold, announced a voice over the facility's PA system. You have been chosen to witness the completion of Florida's transformation. Today, you become part of something greater than humanity. We were led into what appeared to be a former NASA mission control room, repurposed for whatever operation was underway. Massive screens displayed real-time imagery of Florida from above, except half the state was no longer visible in any conventional sense, replaced by a swirling darkness shot through with blue-white energy patterns. At the center of the room stood a figure I recognized instantly despite her transformation. Dr. Meta, she turned, her movements liquid and precise. Her eyes had changed completely where human eyes had been. She now had gently pulsing orbs that shifted colors with her attention. Her skin had the same iridescent quality I'd seen in others, but more pronounced, more complete. You came, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made my teeth vibrate. I hoped you might. You told me not to follow you, I said, backing away. A necessary deception. I needed to be certain you would arrive with the convoy rather than attempting to find this place on your own. She gestured to the screens. You need to see this. All of you do. The truth about what Florida has always been. The central screen changed to display historical imagery, satellite photos, old maps, geological surveys. But as I watched, they began to reveal patterns that shouldn't have been there. Coastlines that formed mathematical sequences. Island chains arranged in crystalline lattices. Underwater topographies that mirrored cosmic structures. Florida was never meant to be permanent. Dr. Meta explained, her new voice resonating throughout the chamber. It was a temporary configuration, an outpost disguised as geography. Outpost for what? I asked, though some part of me, the part that was now 23% converted, already knew. For them, she said simply, the original residents. They're just reclaiming what was always theirs. As if on cue, the emergency broadcast system activated one final time. But instead of tones and voices, what emerged was a sequence of sounds and colors and sensations that bypassed all normal sensory channels, connecting directly to something deeper than consciousness. In that moment, I understood. Florida wasn't vanishing. It was waking up, and we were being invited to wake up with it. I fled the facility in the chaos that followed the final broadcast, while others stood transfixed by the revelation, some collapsing, some weeping, some transforming more rapidly as if in eager response. I remembered enough of my human instincts to run. The security perimeter had dissolved, literally and figuratively. Guards abandoned their posts, drawn to the control room's revelation. The physical boundaries of the complex had begun to warp, walls becoming permeable, fences sinking into grounds that rippled like disturbed water. I had no destination, no plan beyond escape. The coordinates that had brought us here were now a trap. Dr. Meta's transformation wasn't a warning. It was a preview. Day turned to night, turned to day again as I ran. Time had become entirely subjective, accelerating and slowing according to laws I couldn't comprehend. Sometimes I moved through landscape at impossible speed, miles passing in moments. Other times I seemed frozen in place, running for hours without gaining any distance. What remained of Florida had become a dreamscape architect's fever vision. Mountains had risen where none had existed before, their peaks crystalline and semi-transparent. Sinkholes opened and closed like breathing mouths. The boundary between water and air had grown indistinct, creating regions where both existed simultaneously, where fish swam through atmosphere as easily as birds now swooped through lakes. I encountered others occasionally, lone survivors like myself, small groups huddled in the ruins of familiar structures. Some were still mostly human. Others had progressed far beyond me in their transitions, their bodies reflecting the new reality of Florida in ways both beautiful and horrifying. "You're going the wrong way," called a woman whose skin had developed the texture of coral, tiny polyps opening and closing with her breath. "The collection point is eastward." "I'm not going to the collection point," I replied, pausing in my flight. "Then where?" she asked, genuine curiosity in her voice, which somehow emanated from the pattern of polyps rather than her still human mouth. I had no answer. There was nowhere to go. Florida's borders had become mythical concepts. Those who'd attempted to cross them reported space simply looping back on itself, returning travelers to the heart of the transformation. "Away," I finally said, "just away from what's happening." She laughed, a sound like glass wind chimes. "You can't run from this. It's not just happening to Florida. It's happening to time." Before I could question her meaning, the world lurched sideways. The ground beneath me vanished, and I fell not down, but through layers of reality that flashed past like pages in a book riffled by an impatient reader. I landed hard on familiar tile, my apartment, my kitchen, the coffee maker gurgling cheerfully, morning light streaming through the blinds, the exact moment from my time-slip days earlier. But this wasn't a brief visitation. This felt solid, real. The radio on my counter crackled to life. Minor coastal anomalies reported along the Gulf Coast. Authorities advise normal activities may continue. The first alert, the very beginning. I checked my phone, hands shaking. The date confirmed it. I had somehow returned to the morning when everything started. Before the emergency broadcasts turned sinister. Before the black fog consumed the highways. Before Dr. Meta and the facility and the revelation. Was it possible? Had I been given a chance to escape the horror? To warn others, I grabbed my keys and rushed to the door, planning to drive inland immediately, to get as far from Florida as possible before the transformation began again. The door opened not onto my apartment hallway, but onto the university quad where I'd sought refuge days/weeks/epochs later. Standing there was myself, the version of me that had just discovered Dr. Meta's empty office. We stared at each other across an impossible threshold. "You're not real," my other self said, eyes wide with horror. "This is another time slip." "I'm as real as you are," I replied, "but I don't think either of us is real in the way we used to be." As we faced each other, understanding blossomed between us, not spoken, but known in the way dream logic is known. I hadn't traveled back in time. Time itself had collapsed. Past, present, and future Florida now existed simultaneously, overlapping and interpenetrating like transparencies stacked atop one another. "We have to warn them," my other self insisted, desperation in his voice. "We have to stop this from happening." I shook my head sadly. "It's already happened. It's always happened. It will always happen." Even as I spoke, my apartment began to dissolve around me, the walls becoming transparent, revealing other layers of reality behind them. Through one, I could see the highway where I'd fled the black fog. Through another, the military compound with its ritual-like procedures. Through yet another, Dr. Meta in her transformed state, beckoning. Florida is a transition point, I told my other self, understanding flowing into me from somewhere beyond. It was never meant to be permanent. It was always going to return to its original state. "What does that mean?" he demanded, his outline already beginning to blur as the versions of us began to merge. "It means we're not witnessing the end of Florida. We're witnessing its restoration." The boundaries between us dissolved completely. I was simultaneously standing in my apartment on the first day, huddled in the university during the middle days, and witnessing the revelation at the facility, all at once, all equally real. In this new state of awareness, I could perceive what had been hidden before. Florida hadn't been claimed by something alien. Florida itself was the alien thing, a projection into our reality from something far larger. An appendage that had temporarily disguised itself as geography, as history, as human civilization. Now it was being recalled, retracted, reabsorbed, and those of us who had lived upon it, who had believed in its permanence, were being offered a choice: transform along with it, or remain behind as stranded fragments of an abandoned reality. I found myself back at the facility, but it was no longer a building. The walls had dissolved entirely, revealing a vast structure that extended beyond normal space, a hyperdimensional lattice that pulsed with information and purpose. Dr. Meta approached, her form now barely recognizable, her consciousness radiating outward in patterns I could somehow read. "You understand now," she said, her voice bypassing my ears and forming directly in my mind. "This is why I brought you here. You needed to see the whole truth. Florida was never real," I said, the words feeling insufficient for the concept. "Florida was a bridge," she corrected, "a temporary structure extending between realities. Now the crossing is complete, and the bridge is being dismantled. In the center of the facility that was no longer a facility, something vast was emerging, or rather, revealing itself. It had always been there, beneath the skin of reality, beneath the limestone and aquifers, beneath the history and geography of the place we called Florida." The emergency alert system activated one final time across all layers of collapsed time and space. But now, instead of fear, I felt recognition as the message formed not in words but in pure understanding. We are complete. We are returned. We are home. I turned to find another version of myself standing nearby, not from the past or future, but from a parallel track. A version that had made different choices. His eyes widened in recognition. "We need to warn them," he began. "It's too late," I replied, feeling neither sadness nor joy, only acceptance. It always was, as Florida completed its transformation around us, dissolving into its true form. I understood at last that we hadn't been witnessing an invasion or catastrophe. We had been witnessing a homecoming, and in that moment of clarity, I composed one final alert, not to warn, but to welcome those who would come after, knowing that this message was already being received by my past self, creating the loop that had always existed and would always exist. Emergency alert. Florida's coastline has not vanished. Florida's coastline has returned.